So here's kind of a chart. I know that the stuff's hard to read, but if you wanted to kind of practice, like think through, you can kind of look at audience, action, and then these are all of the different kind of things. So here are the individuals. So this might be like a freelance artist, right? But he's using the app. He's on the go. He's not at his mobile computer because he's meeting with clients all the time. And so then, what does he need? And you just kind of run through. So this might be a chart that might help you if you're kind of trying to think through how to do things, and you're in this practice situation. And then referring back to the chart here, which again, I would encourage you to do with your own teams to figure out what communications actually matter, what communication artifacts actually matter to you and your teams. Go through and just be mindful when you create these things. Be mindful that these are really good secondary artifacts. Is there something that we forget? Like when we change the architecture, am I remembering to put an architecture decision record so that that decision is then codified into the code base and the rationale is there, right? So if you get nothing else out of this talk, there's one thing I want you to remember. And this is the first step. This is actually a pre-first step to realizing that empathy is a skill. And that is to remember that you are not coding for the computer. When I've talked to engineers over the past 10 years, one of the things that I find is that you get so used to working with the computer that you start to personify it a little bit. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need to remember that the computer is a tool. The source code is a tool to help us deliver value to other humans. And when you start to imagine who all of those other humans are, things start to change. And one example of this is that we don't code in ones and zeros anymore. We write in compiled languages because they are easier to read for humans, right? The computer only cares about the ones and zeros. And so what are some other ways, in addition to making your code self-revealing and well-tested, what are some other ways that you can use these emergent principles to make your software easier for other humans? And I would argue that then the legacy that you will leave behind is something that's very positive. Because when we think about legacy, we think about what are we leaving behind? In every other context, in at least in English, legacy is a very, very positive term. It's the legacy that I'm leaving behind after I'm gone, right? It's an intentional thing. And so how can we change that frame of reference where legacy code is just the code that was like, oh, nobody cared about that? How can we imbue our intention into it so that the legacy we're leaving behind is something that other people can take up the mantle and continue to develop? So some key takeaways is to remember that empathy is a skill. It's a technical skill. It's a technical skill that is critical in software. Empathy is a skill that you can develop, right, by practice. And the way that I've kind of defined that is proactive perspective taking and problem solving. There's a lot of different definitions. I would encourage you to go do the research yourself. Without empathy, we get an unhealthy and toxic culture, and it makes it difficult to maintain and sustain quality software. If you think about empathy-driven development and you like that framework, TDD is red, green, refactor. You can think of empathy-driven development as audience and action, right? Who is my audience? What situation are they in? And then what action am I going to take to develop that software and move that software along? You can practice empathy by leaving really good artifacts of your thinking for other people to find. Throughout this process, the goal is to invoke curiosity, respect, and non-judgment, and also avoiding assumptions. So that's what I've got. My contact information is on the screen. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Do we have time for a question or two? Anyone?
Absolutely. I love questions.
If you raise your hand really high, because there's a lot of you and I won't be able to see it. Yes, we have up there. There we go. I missed him. Where is he? There he is.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. It was super interesting. I have a question. How can I influence other people with my behavior to help them improve their empathy? So I can take some actions, your nice suggestions, but can I do something to help them also increase their empathy, their empathetical skills?
Yeah, I think
Thanks.
so. So I think the first step is to get really good at it yourself, right? So just like with any skill, right? Start with yourself, right? If rather than saying, I saw this talk about empathy and now we are going to have empathy, right? That tends to not work as well. But if you take more of a servant leadership type of role, where you say, I'm going to get really good at learning how to build rapport with other people. I'm going to get really good at leaving these communication artifacts, right? You might find that people are curious about, how are you delivering so well? Well, I've noticed that you might have changed. And then it's an opportunity to kind of bring that up. I mean, another example would be, if you're managing a team, you can start to say, okay, folks, here's kind of the standard, right? So a style guide is sometimes good for communication artifacts. But I say that sometimes, we can think about like the cognitive empathy and just doing just the style guides, but that's kind of leaving behind the emotional side of it as well. So, my suggestion is to just start with yourself, right? And then start with somebody else on your team, that concentric circle, right? So who's your pair partner, or who's somebody that you work with closely every day, right? How can you build more trust and empathy with them? And then once the two of you have gotten really good at, how can you then do it on your team, right? And then it can build out and out. And clearly, I mean, if you're the CEO and you're kind of in the executive, then you can kind of have more of an impact. But definitely kind of a start where you are type of approach.
Any more? Yes. Help me out. Thank you.
Hi, Andrea. Good to see you.
Thank you. You too.
Often, from what I've seen, empathy and emotions and feelings are kind of perceived like weak characteristics, and often more female characteristics.
Yeah.
You're not a very good and strong boss if you are a female human who has feelings.
Yes.
So how do you respond to that? Please help me out.
Yes, I feel that very deeply. So I would encourage you to read Brené Brown's work. So from the research that she's done, she has shown that the leaders who get the most creativity, innovation, and can navigate change the best, otherwise leaders that are effective, one of the key traits that they have is vulnerability, right? There's also, if you're able to watch, there's a special that she has on Netflix. She also has some TED Talks. So being able to just kind of look at this. So the way that you're able to reframe vulnerability, we're actually entering a good time, because I think her work is starting to kind of permeate the consciousness. And we're realizing that the command and control, strong boss, I'm going to yell at you, that isn't very effective. And so, at least on the business side, right, there is more recognition that being more open, being more transparent, being more vulnerable can be a source of strength. So her book, her work specifically completely changed the way that I lead. When I first started, my slogan was, I'm not type A, which means like I like everything like command and control, like I like having everything where it's supposed to be. Somebody told me about Greek suggested time, right? Like I am struggling in the Greek suggested time kind of world. I like things starting where they are. But yeah, my slogan used to be, I'm not type A, I'm type A plus. Like I will have everything ready. And what ends up happening when you live in that world is you get shame, you get, like I had burnout, right? Like you get all these kind of negative things. And just like shame, empathy is the antidote to shame. We've got a lot of those kind of things for vulnerability as well, where being open and being honest and sharing your emotions are seen now as signs of strength and not weakness. So, yeah.
And I'll take one more, but only one more, if we have one. There we are.
I can speak and everyone can listen to me as always. Hi. So my question is, if you have a really good advice for the people that are in hiring positions, hiring managers, that would make them realize that empathy is not a weakness, as you said. What can we tell to those people to realize that is not a weakness?
Yeah, I think some of it is in the questions. Like, so if you're putting together maybe a job requisition, we call it job rec, right? And putting together what are the skills that are needed for this, right? If you're hiring, like, put that as a skill, right? That you need to collaborate, you need to demonstrate empathy, right? We've done that, and we've actually had tremendous success. We've had amazing applicants who have applied for us because we said that we were looking for somebody with empathy. So, it depends on kind of how much influence you have there, but there's a lot of demonstration that kind of that skill in particular can be really effective for collaboration and things like that. So I would say maybe doing some research, bringing that back, but then just putting it into baking it into the recruiting process. This is kind of what we've done. So for us, like, our number one core value is act with empathy, right? And people were like, you're a software company. I was like, yes. And that's our number one core value. So people come to us for that. We've got it listed when we post a job description. It's very clear, like, this is what we're looking for. And then when we're doing the interview process, we're asking questions in, kind of the scenarios of, like, tell me a time, tell me a time that something was a struggle and, you approached it with empathy. Or tell me about a time that it was difficult for you to see someone else's point of view, but then you worked on it, and what resolution did you get to? So there are some ways to kind of build this into the recruiting process, but it does take a little bit of work and collaboration. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of...
Oh.
Yeah.
So how do you influence the recruiter?
The recruiter, the hiring manager?
Yeah, how do you influence? So same practice, right? So you run through the scenario, you figure out kind of what is it that they need, what are their challenges, right? You run through that 6-step process, and you figure out what is it that they're struggling with, what are their challenges, and you approach it from a place of trying to understand their world first, and then the solution will emerge. You act with empathy towards the hiring manager, you build that rapport, and then the solution for whatever that context is will be emergent. So, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.